Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another edition of World Talks here on TVP World. I'm your host, Benjamin Lee, and please join me and my guests on this next interview. President Zelensky's meeting in Washington and London have highlighted tensions in the transatlantic alliance. His clash with Donald Trump raises concern about U.S. support, while European leaders pledge stronger backing. Is the EU prepared to take the lead, or does it still depend on Washington? How will this impact Ukraine's war effort? Joining us today on TVP World to break down the EU-U.S. dynamics is Maciej Kisilowski, Associate Professor of Law and Strategy at Central European University. Hello, sir, and welcome to TVP World.
Hello.
Most recent developments see Ursula von der Leyen stating that European Union needs to arm up. What does that say about the European Union's confidence when it comes to U.S. as a reliable ally?
Well, Europe needs to finally realize what has been happening in the last few days, which is Donald Trump has used his favorite art of deflecting. We've been all hyperventilating about this, historical spat in the White House. But what is really happening is that Donald Trump does not have a good peace plan in his hand and a good peace deal in his hand. This is very typical of right-wing populists like him. They come with the idea that complex problems can be solved with simple solutions. Like in 2020, he wanted to solve the COVID pandemic by making people ingest bleach. Now he thought he will simply force Ukraine to surrender to Putin's 2022 demands. Unfortunately, as Scott Bessent, his Secretary of Treasury, found out a month ago, he met a very proud nation. Ukraine, as its neighbors like Poland know for centuries, is fiercely independent, fiercely proud, and is not going to surrender to bullying even by Donald Trump. Scott Bessent went to Kiev, and we know how it ended. He was shaking, visibly trembling during press conference because he realized that this idea of Ukraine surrendering to Putin is just a pipe dream. It's another fake solution, fake dream of Donald Trump. And then the administration went into damage control and tried to find a way to deflect and shift the blame on Zelenskyy. So now we are all talking about the spat in the White House, and that gives Trump a lot of flexibility, because if he at the end still manages to convince Zelenskyy somehow miraculously, which I doubt, to surrender to Putin, he will be this amazing, magical deal maker. And if he more likely doesn't, he will blame Zelenskyy for the fallout and avoid responsibility for over-promising and under-delivering, as he always does, and as populist right-wing authoritarians always do. So Europe needs to realize that there is no Trump peace deal on the table, that this was pipe dream all along, and now the adults in the room will need to take over and try to find out whether there can be some sort of a real deal with Putin. And that's what the London summit was about trying to take the reins of this process, because Trump's idea was, as I said, a pipe dream.
Right, but when it comes to this deal for Ukraine, what realistic alternatives are we looking at? Does Ukraine have any other choice? Because their stated goal right now is to recover all the territory, well, some even say including Crimea. Is that something realistic to be pursued, or at least some sort of security guarantee is where they will have to be okay with?
Again, especially for the viewers who are not from this region, Ukraine and Ukrainian people are one of the toughest people I know personally around the world. They have been fighting for their sovereignty, for their statehood for centuries. And so they have an alternative, which is they continue fighting. And I think it's the art of another quality of right-wing populists like Trump, which is ability to shape our narratives, that because Trump has been repeating and his entourage has been repeating so long that there is no other choice but to surrender to Putin, we started to parrot that narrative. But of course, the reality is that Ukraine has been fighting for 3 years. It has been losing a bit of territory over the last year, but before it was gaining some territory. So it's not obvious that it will continue to lose territory, especially if Europe steps up its support. And the price that Ukrainian people will pay for it is huge. And obviously, everybody wants that to end and to have peace rather than war. But again, the issue is if Ukrainian people want to fight, it's going to be impossible to make them surrender. It's just not a realistic scenario. It's, as I said at the beginning, it's one of those seemingly straightforward and easy solutions that populists tell us they have, but it's actually not a solution. Yes, it's not a realistic option. They need to be convinced that there will be a just and lasting peace. And I think that President Zelenskyy was very clear in that White House debacle. He was very clear what is the essential kernel of this just and lasting peace. He didn't mention once Crimea. He didn't mention once the territory, apart from the fact when he was recanting factually how Putin was breaking the previous deals, but not in a sense of bringing it up as a demand. The only thing he was repeatedly bringing in the White House and in the Fox News interview was security guarantees, because it's obvious that Trump's magical deal was supposed to be the territorial concessions and no security guarantees, which is basically everything that Putin wanted in 2022. And maybe a friendly government if we add the idea of Zelenskyy resigning and some election in the wartime, in the confusion. Maybe there is also a hope for kind of a Georgian type of scenario in which there is a moderately pro-Russian government in Kiev governing the rest of nominally sovereign Ukraine. That's not going to happen, in my view, after 3 years and with everything I know about the Ukrainian people.
All right. Well, Keir Starmer mentioned forming the coalition of the willing. And of course, like you mentioned, more and more European leaders are pitching in support of Ukraine, which is a divergence and stance between the EU and the United States. Do you think that this is going to have a great effect in terms of Western unity and the relation between U.S. and the EU?
Well, there won't be unity at the moment because Trump, for now, needs to cover for the fact that his peace deal idea clearly didn't work. If Europe takes over, Europeans are still not governed by populists, so they will be gentle enough to give Trump enough credit that he can save his face if they manage to really arrange a deal with Putin and Zelenskyy. But of course, that depends on whether Putin is really interested in having, a real compromise as opposed to a deal, which means he gets everything he wanted in 2022. That, of course, he would take gladly. All the statements from Moscow suggest that he was quite enthusiastic in accepting this fantastic deal that Trump concocted. But now, if Europeans come with some real deal, which is some compromise, perhaps freezing of the border without acknowledging the Russian sovereignty, which is a common solution. It happened in Cyprus, it happened in many countries around the world in similar situations when you don't have a formal transfer of sovereignty, it's just freezing of hostilities. But crucially, with Western security guarantees, I'm not sure if Putin is willing to take this. And if he's not willing to take it, and Ukrainians are not going to surrender, because again, they won't, I think that's not in their DNA to surrender, then you will have more of the conflict that we have. And there is no easy solution out of it. There needs to be a genuine will on both sides to compromise. I think there is a lot contrary to what Trump wants us to believe. There is actually more willingness to compromise on the Ukrainian side. And as I said, it's evidenced by the fact that Zelensky did not mention the occupied territories in his demands. He only focused on security guarantees. But I think the problem is that Vladimir Putin is not, and Moscow mentioned it, yes, when there was a talk about European troops guaranteeing peace, Moscow very clearly and very forcefully said they reject this. And I think that is the main problem, that I don't think Putin is ready for a fair compromise.
All right. And last but not least, we have a little bit of time. I'd like to pick your brain on this quite interesting article I read in the Financial Times citing them. They say that, well, Nord Stream 2 may see a revival. A former spy and close friend of Vladimir Putin is actually pushing to restart Russia's Nord Stream 2 pipeline to Europe. Is such a project realistic in your opinion?
Well, if there is peace, yes, because, of course, Russia will never agree to any peace unless economic relations are normalized. And if economic relations are normalized, there is still a cost advantage to the Russian gas. Yes, so I think it would be realistic if there is a peace, as President Zelensky said, just and lasting peace in Ukraine.
All right. Thank you so much for your input and insight. We live in very interesting times. Thank you so much for being with us on TVP World. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching this edition of World Talks. For more news, update, and commentary, please stay tuned to TVP World.